Welcome back, everyone. We'll take this opportunity in this video to highlight some of the foods that are bad for brain health. Although we gave you a general idea of what a whole food plant-based diet is, we believe it's important to go into some specifics and details of these bad foods.
So here are the bad actors. We're talking about meats, cheeses, processed foods, salty foods, sugary pastries, and alcohol.
We talked in detail about sugar and its effect on the brain in a separate video, so we'll start talking about meat. Now, there's plenty of data that shows the relationship between meat consumption and brain health. We alluded to the data in the introduction, but here we wanted to talk to you about where people go wrong with regards to how meat can have negative effects on the brain. There appears to be two elements of meat that are at play here. The first one is the content of saturated fats in meat and cholesterol. And the second one is the sirtuin pathway, which is an enzyme, and we will talk about that later. But there is also potentially another pathway, the fact that animals are bioconcentrators, which means that toxins in our environment get concentrated in animal flesh. In fact, we have specific organs dedicated in our body for removal of toxins, such as our liver, but even they can get easily overwhelmed because of the amount of toxins in our food. And that's why larger fish, like tunas, have higher amounts of toxins, and smaller fish, like sardines, have less toxins. By the way, let me tell you a little bit more about the oceans and the toxin story. In the last few decades, we have added tens of thousands of chemicals in our oceans, and we only check a few toxins in the fish that we catch. We check mercury and lead, and that's basically it. Probably some organophosphates. And we already have a video on fish in this course, so you'll get more information there. So let's get back to saturated fats. Now, there is no doubt that red meat, beef and chicken, have more saturated fats than, say, turkey. But one thing that most people get wrong is that much of that fat, or the saturated fat, is not the fat strips or the streaks that the butcher removes, but the unique cellular structure of the animals. Saturated fats and cholesterol are present in their cell walls. So regardless of the meat being lean or grass-fed for that matter, the saturated fat and cholesterol is an integral part of red meat. And there's been a lot of studies that show that people who consume red meat, especially processed red meat, are at a higher risk of having cognitive impairment and dementia. And we listed the studies in the previous videos. And there is another concept of sirtuins that is completely different from the concept of saturated fats, and we'll talk about that now. So sirtuins are enzymes. Now, there are special proteins in our DNA that are called histones. They act like a spool, and the DNA is like the thread. Now, this particular enzyme, sirtuin, it wraps the DNA around the histone spool. And by doing so, it silences whatever genes were in that stretch of DNA. Hence the name sirtuin. The SIR stands for Silencing Information Regulator. Although they were discovered only about a decade ago, the studies of sirtuins have become one of the most important and promising areas of medicine, since they appear to be involved in promoting healthy aging and longevity. And the suppression of this sirtuin is considered a central feature of Alzheimer's disease. Now, when they did autopsies of Alzheimer's disease patients, it showed that there's a loss of sirtuin enzyme activity. And this loss of sirtuin activity is very closely associated with the accumulation of amyloid plaques and tangles in the brains that is characteristic of Alzheimer's disease. Now, sirtuins appear to activate pathways that steer the brain away from the formation of plaque and tangles. And because we've detected a decrease in sirtuin activity and its association with bad nerve health or brain cellular health, scientists are trying to understand how to increase sirtuin activity. Is it possible for us to prevent its suppression in the first place? There are these particular compounds that are called AGEs, or advanced glycation end products, are found in massive amounts in modern diets, and these can be neurotoxic. High levels of AGEs in blood can predict cognitive decline over time, and they've done a lot of studies on it. If you measure urine levels of glycotoxins flowing through the bodies of older adults, those with the highest level went on to suffer the greatest cognitive decline over the subsequent years, in one study over 9 years. As we age, our brain literally shrinks. In our 60s and 70s, we lose an average of about 5 cubic centimeters of total brain tissue.
2%.
But some actually lose way more than that. Now, this brain shrinkage may be reduced in very healthy individuals, and a few people don't lose brain at all. They actually have very healthy brains.
Normally, we lose about 2% of brain tissue every year. That's after the age of 60 or so. But that's just the average. But we know now that in certain population, as we'll show in exercise and every other section, not only do you not lose brain tissue, but you can actually gain brain tissue. And a major part of that is the food you eat and avoiding things that actually affect AGEs or increase in AGEs or block the sirtuins. And guess what's the major element that contributes to that? Meat.
Researchers in Australia provided the first evidence that links AGEs with this kind of cerebral brain loss. So when you limit your consumption of AGEs, which are found in meat, actually ends up having significant health benefits for the brain. Foods most contaminated with glycotoxins are mostly meats, especially chicken, but also pork, beef, and fish, which may help explain why those who eat the most meat may have triple the risk of getting dementia compared to those who eat a whole food plant-based diet.
So all that we've been talking about is actually around the concept of epigenetics. It's the most exciting topic of the 21st century. In fact, that's what we're talking about. It's not the fact that we don't believe in genes. Genes do have an effect on all diseases, including chronic diseases. But they give you a range. They give you risk. What happens to those genes is what's important through processes such as histones and sirtuins, as well as methylation and glycosylation. And all those factors are determined by the foods we eat and environmental factors that influence our genes. So everything we talk about is what we do to our genes and how that will manifest in chronic diseases such as Alzheimer's.
Now let's talk about cheese. I have to admit, when we talk about cheese and it not being good for the brain, a lot of people get upset because it's really difficult to let go of cheese. And since we don't have a lot of time, and I would love to do another session just on cheese for you guys, there are certain compounds called casomorphine in cheese that are actually addictive. Your brain craves cheese. But unfortunately, when you look at the cheeses that are made, whether they're processed or unprocessed, it's essentially a concentrated source of saturated fats, the same type of fats that are detrimental for vessel health. So we say, try to stay away from cheese. We're so fortunate that nowadays we have options for nut-based cheeses, which are packed with monounsaturated fats and polyunsaturated fats and very low unsaturated fats, so you can definitely go and try those. Now let's talk about salt. Why is salt bad for brain health? Well, we discussed it in the previous videos. The same kind of blood vessels that go to your heart, to your kidney, and the rest of your body parts actually go to your brain as well. As a matter of fact, the brain is the most vascular organ in our body. And imagine all of these tiny, small little blood vessels being under the effect of your blood pressure. Salt raises our blood pressure, it causes damage to the inner linings of our blood vessels, and these small tiny blood vessels that supply nutrients and oxygen to the different critical parts of our brain get damaged when our blood pressure is very high. So opting a low salt diet is always helpful. And we've seen this in large research studies as well. The MIND diet, which is a hybrid of the Mediterranean, and the DASH diet. DASH diet is a diet that is low in salt, seem to be beneficial. And a whole food plant-based diet basically has no salt. So not adding table salt is always a good idea for brain health.
Absolutely. Now, if you thought cheese was going to get people upset, alcohol is going to get them even more upset, because as people might think that alcohol is beneficial for the brain because some study came out from France that a glass of wine is good for you, actually the data is not there for alcohol.
Even when you look at the Mediterranean diet, the components of Mediterranean diet, wine doesn't really stand out as far as its brain health effects are concerned.
Correct. Now, alcohol in itself is a neurotoxin. It's not good for you. So whenever we talk about wine, we say, in general, the goal is to avoid alcohol because there is no benefit for it, except for an unusual little social element. It appears that wine drinking in itself is not beneficial, but wine drinking in low amounts in a social setting seem to actually have benefit, and its effect seems to be through its social lubricating capacity. That's completely understood because those who are more socially active have better brain health. So if you need one glass of wine to get you more social once in a while, absolutely do so.
So we tell our patients, if you've never tried alcohol or wine in your life, there is no need for you to add it to your diet because it's not going to benefit you at all. As a matter of fact, the alcohol in wine might actually be neurotoxic and detrimental. But if you do like a glass of wine here and there to use it socially, to relax and be with your loved ones, that's absolutely fine. Okay, that was it for the bad foods for the brain. And in next week's video, we will talk about replacement, this versus that. So we'll give you specific techniques of replacing some of the bad items with good items. And we will see you at the next video.